Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some things that I see happening in the larger world and how those things potentially could have some impact on us as collectors. As you'll recall, one of my channel's mission is to help us to be smarter about comic book collecting. And part of that is to make sure that we aren't just focused on comic book collecting and not paying attention to other things that are happening in the world. And so over this last year, I've spent a healthy amount of time talking about the possibility of recession, what's happening with inflation, the possibility of stagflation. And so I want to kind of continue in that vein. Part of the reason for that is because none of us really know what the future holds. None of us knows exactly what's going to happen in this economy of ours. In fact, the experts can't even agree. Depending upon where you get your information from, you could hear slightly different interpretations of the data. And I actually found a really cool article from Deloitte that I wanted to cite for you. In the introduction for this article, Deloitte basically says that if you're looking toward economic data for clarity on the state of the U.S. economy, rest assured you won't find it there. Every day, observers change their stance as one day's news provides a different picture from the previous day's news. And often, it seems like a never-ending stream of bad news. If it's news about inflation and the Fed's reaction one day, the next day's headlines indicate a problem of recession, followed by more bad news about inflation. At the end of the day, no one knows how any of this is going to turn out. And so it is with that in mind that I wanted to offer up some things for us to think about as collectors. My thought here is that if you think that you're going to need money in the next 6 months or so, and you think things could get tight, you may want to consider selling part of your collection. In a previous video, I advised people to take a hard look at their personal collection and kind of sort it into two groups. Those things that you absolutely want to keep and those things that you might be willing to let go of. If you took that advice, you already have identified some books that you could potentially sell. And part of the reason why I'm giving this advice is because we don't know what the future holds for the economy. But we do know that people have life events. We have Christmas coming up. We have people that are getting married. We have people that are having kids. These are all great things that have to be celebrated. And so if you think that you're going to need money, you may want to sell those books in advance of actually needing that cash versus waiting until maybe the economy gets a little worse and hard for everybody and then try to sell those books potentially at a greater loss than if you were to sell them now. My whole point here is that if you anticipate needing money in the next 6 months or so, you might want to take a look at those books that you've set aside, and you may want to pull the trigger on selling those books and then socking that money away for that life event that could occur. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a life event. It could just be you're in fear of maybe losing your job, or you just want to have some extra cash reserves. My point here is that you definitely want to be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve, because as I mentioned from this Deloitte article, the experts can't even agree as to what's going to happen next. There's another part of this Deloitte article that I want to cite for you as well. And the article says, and yet, for all the noise, the U.S. economy doesn't look that bad. Employment growth remains strong and many measures of economic activity are growing, even if more slowly than last year. Oil and food prices have been falling at the wholesale level, and consumers are beginning to see the results in stores. Gasoline prices fell below $4 per gallon in August. Consumer spending remains positive as consumers continue to spend down the massive savings they accumulated during the pandemic. Inflation, however, is likely to remain a concern. In fact, when you look at some of the additional data that's out there, Oil and gas prices are indeed coming down, but inflation still remains high. Yes, it is lower than it has been ever so slightly, but it still remains high versus historical norms. In fact, when you look at the average of what we are seeing this year thus far versus last year, it's almost double the rate that was seen in all of last year. So yes, inflation is low, but it still remains a concern. And we don't know ultimately how the federal government, how the Fed is going to respond to what they continue to see in terms of high inflation. As you would imagine, there is also some counter data out there, counter to what it is that I just cited from Deloitte. So I wanted to provide that to you as well for a little bit of context. This one actually comes from the Conference Board, and what they say is that while we do not believe the U.S. is currently in a recession due to strength in a number of sectors and the extremely tight labor market, we expect that a broad downturn in the economy is on its way. The article goes on to say the weakening economic growth seen over the course of 2022, coupled with persistent high inflation readings, are consistent with a stagflationary economy or environment. And again, we don't know which of these groups is right, but we do know that they don't agree. And again, if you cast the net wider, you're going to find even more discrepancies and more people that will agree to one set of facts versus another set. At the end of the day, we do not know what the future holds, which is why it's important that we take a look at our own situations and make some decisions based upon what we think, what we believe, and what we imagine could happen in the near future. And if that requires you to sell off a couple of comics, do what you have to do. Another reason why I wanted to create this video is because I personally have been contacted by at least 3 people in just the last week alone that have contacted me about selling comics to address some needs that they have in their life. And my thought is that if I get 3 people in 1 week, there's probably some other people that are about to send me messages or just haven't gotten around to it for whatever reason. So again, I am all about the community. I am all about helping us be smarter about this hobby. And so I wanted to create this video in that spirit. I remain optimistic about the hobby. Let it be said, I remain optimistic about the hobby, no doubt about it. I believe that the hobby is here to stay, but I want all of you as collectors to be here with me. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.